How's it going, everybody? So one thing you probably know is that the French are filthy by virtue of being French. However, what you might not know is that the French are excellent firearms designers, especially the ones that moved to Belgium, also known as non-filthy French. But the French have led the way on firearms designs throughout history. Now, of course, there are other contenders, but the French especially have made extremely exquisite firearms throughout history. Now, one of them I'll be showing you today is the French M16, not the full auto American rifle. Now, the French M16 is kind of the last rifle in a series of the Berthier rifles. Now, this spanned quite a long time. They were instituted about the 1890s and were used all the way up to the 1960s by police. An amazing span of time for a bolt-action rifle. And it's really because they were really good rifles based around an antiquated caliber, and that caliber is, of course, the 8mm Lebel. Now, interestingly, these firearms were brought into service not as a full-length rifle, but they were meant specifically to be carbines for the cavalry. The first ones came into service were 3-round guns. Now, what they were replacing was the Lebel 1886. And the Lebel 1886 is an extremely interesting rifle. I hope to get my hands on a shootable one eventually. I've been trying for years. But it's a tube-fed bolt action. Now, the problem with a tube-fed is when you try to shrink it down for the cavalry, you end up with a very small magazine size. Now, the Lebel had an 8-round magazine, which was an amazing amount of firepower in those days, but it had issues, one of which being you couldn't really shrink it down, and second being it was extremely slow to load. So they had to think of something that would be very easy for the cavalry to load and have a capacity that was good enough for them to use. So what they came up with was the Berthier. Now, if you want a full history on every single model, I suggest seeing our channel. They go through the entire line, explain everything about it. This is more of a video on owning, shooting, and reloading for this rifle. Now, this rifle, as I said, is really the last in the line. Now, originally, these rifles were a 3-round gun. This is a 3-round clip that they would have used. Now, the original ones, that was a bit of a problem because they were going from the 8-round Lebel to the 3-round Berthier. Not all of the troops were thrilled about that, but it worked. Eventually, in 1916, they finally added the 5-round end block clip, but that was really late. So most of the troops fighting would have seen the 3-round guns. Now, the advantage of this gun over the Lebel is that it loads extremely quickly. Basically uses an end block clip, a lot like an M1 Garand. Doesn't function the same way, but in practical terms it does. So basically you take the entire clip and just jam it in there. And it stays. Then you load. Now, one thing to keep in mind about this gun, if you plan on hunting with one of these, is that you probably shouldn't, because this does not actually have a safety. These were meant to be carried empty, so you jam it in there and basically carry it like that, or just jam it in there when you were ready to shoot. But these were not meant to be carried with a round in the chamber. Now, when we get down to actual shooting, there's some things you should know. First off, these carbines are a bit rough to shoot. The full-length versions, which I unfortunately don't have yet, are a little better, but these ones are quite a bear to shoot. Now, I've loaded these rounds down to be target loads, so they're not quite as bad as they would be with the original ammunition, but still, you're firing a very short, light gun with a full power rifle round, so keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is the French designed these rifles basically to have a short range, sight picture. I'll show you the sights now. Basically, it looks like a really, really fat pistol sight. I don't know if you can see that notch on there, but it looks like a pistol sight when you're looking down it, and it's very difficult to get used to. I prefer an extremely thin front sight on most of my rifles, so it's a bit jarring for me. What they did, however, I think I can show you, was I should be able to see. You see that little notch in the top of the front sight? that is meant to be your long-range sight. The actual sight post itself is meant to be short-range, you know, street combat kind of thing, or used for the cavalry while you're running past someone. Really not meant for long range. It's very difficult to shoot this rifle at long range for me. But let's get to some shooting now. So as I said, this rifle is meant to be kept empty. So I have 3 rounds in the gun now. Load the first one. Now these don't always tend to extract right, and something you need to know about these is that it blows out the case a lot. Some people actually are really disturbed by that and don't realize that that is a feature of this gun. The reason it's like that is the chambers are reamed out rather large so that they function with dirt in them. You prefer not to do that, but when you're talking about a battlefield like World War I, it's extremely useful. The downside of that for reloading is that these cases do not last long. What you have to do is heat these cases up and anneal them, basically to get the brass from hardening too much, and then you'll be able to resize it a couple of times. But because there's that much expansion, these really do not tend to last very long. Now the advantage over the Lebel, as I said, was very quick loading. Basically, the Lebel, you had to put your thumb inside the gun and shove the cases in one by one. It was an extremely long process. This gun actually loads basically as fast as a modern magazine gun. You just throw the next one in and you're good to go. Now, with an end block clip like the M1 Grand, as you can see, it just falls out. This is actually a feature that was just on this gun. Originally, they would have just been open, but they found in World War I that got clogged with dirt. Now, this guards it, and when it's down, the clip just falls out at the end, and you're ready to throw in a new one. You don't have to mess with anything. It's just good to go. The gun's empty. Extremely good feature, made for a very fast-firing gun. Definitely an advantage in combat. Now, as I said, the original ones were 3-rounders. That kind of bothered people, so they went to a 5-round clip. Now, you'll notice that I'm shooting these with a 3-rounder. The reason for that is that basically the 5-rounders cannot be found for any amount of money. They just simply do not exist. But the 3-rounders are available. Another problem is that these clips are basically not meant to be used over and over again. They were disposable originally, but they haven't been made for an extremely long time, so we're stuck with originals. So if you don't baby them, they can begin to get deformed and just simply won't work well. This seems to be more of a problem with the 5-round clips. If you have them, I really don't suggest using them because there's none left and you can't get any more. So if you have them, keep them as a display item, but I really don't suggest using them. They don't work after a certain number of times, and you're only going to get a small amount of mileage out of them. So it's a little bit about the clips. Now, in terms of accuracy, I found these guns to be extremely accurate. The bore on this one is perfect. The only issue I have is, as I said, at long range. These sights just, to me, do not seem to be made well for long range. Now, I'm sure there are people out there that could get these to perform, but it's so different than the sights I'm used to that I really can't. I normally shoot this gun up to 100 yards, and that's as far as I'm really going to go with it. Right now, I'm going to shoot at about 50 and give you an indication of how accurate this gun can be. We'll talk about the loads I'm using in a little bit, but I will say that they're very light for this gun. It's not real heavy, so that's part of the reason I'm shooting it at a closer distance, is that it's just not going to perform as well as the original at longer distances with the load I'm using. Now, part of the reason I'm using that load is because this gun was made in 1922, and I really don't want to beat it up too bad. Also, it's just really not necessary at that range. As I said, no safety on this, so keep that in mind. Now that clip stayed in there, but it should have popped out. This clip is one of the older ones I had, and you could probably see that there was a little bit of difficulty with loading it there, and that really has to do with the fact that these are just stamped sheet metal, and given their age, they don't last very long. So no matter how many you buy, you're always going to have a couple that are just a little messed up, just due to the fact that these are used and ancient. So keep that in mind when you're buying these. Basically, when these clips run out and there are no more, these guns are going to be single shot guns because they do not function without the end block clip. So keep that in mind when you're buying them. You're going to also want to get some clips with them, and you're going to want to baby those. So this is the 3-shot group I got with that. I mean, it's not bad. I probably pulled this one up here, so that's more than likely my fault. But this is the area my gun tends to shoot in. It tends to get a very good group. So it's not an issue there. I don't know why it shoots high. I think that has to do with the way the gun was originally set up, but it always seems to shoot high right. I'm going to work on getting it centered more, but the group is always good. It's not a horrible group, first off, but if I had concentrated a little more, I probably could have pulled that a little closer. So one thing I think that happens with any gun that was used in World War II, and this was, is that they always get compared to the K98. And I think that's unfair for some rifles, but for this gun, I think it's a fair comparison. How this stands up to the K98 is, I think the K98 is better. Reasons for that being that the cartridge is better, and it's a more rugged rifle in some ways. However, I really think this was a fine rifle. It's certainly better than other ones that were out there. I think the end block clip was really well designed on this gun. The fact that it's got this little door. By the way, this door opens automatically when you shove a new clip in there. So if you forget to open this, this is not a big deal. I think it's a very well designed gun, and I think it would have worked just fine in World War II. And it was by some German police units. But I think what holds this gun back is the caliber it uses, really, the 8mm Lebel. We'll talk about that in a minute. But stacking this up against the K98, I think it does fine. In terms of accuracy, in terms of firepower, it really is a contender. I mean, it does actually do some things better. This is faster loading than a K98. I'm not really sure how much that really matters on the battlefield, but if your soldier's standing there trying to reload your K98 as quickly as you can, whereas this guy can just jam another clip in there and he's done, I think that might be an advantage. But in terms of everything else, this really does hold up against the standard, the K98. I really like this rifle. I like French rifles in general, despite the French being filthy. But this one is really one of my favorites. I hope to get a 1907 or one of the actual rifles for this. That might be down the way, and I'd really like to get a Lebel 1886 to compare to this, but this is definitely one of my favorite bolt actions in my collection. It's really fun to shoot, really well made gun, very interesting. Now I'll show you some closer up shots of it. We'll talk a little bit more about reloading and the practical aspects of owning one of these and shooting one of these. Alright, now that we've got the gun back at the bench, let's talk about a couple things concerning the practical aspects of owning and firing one of these. First off is the clips. I've pretty much gone over these. These were expendable items to begin with, and each time you use one, basically you're breaking it because you have to stretch it out to use it. And a couple of problems with that is this is the feed lip for the gun. If the feed lips on this clip are damaged, it's not going to function in your gun very well. And also, if this gets bent too much, first off, it can crack around here and completely ruin the clip. But also, they can kind of lose their springiness and they won't hold the rounds anymore. And basically, they'll just pop out on you. That's more of a problem with the 5-rounders I found, but these 3-rounders can also have that issue. These 3-rounders do seem to last a bit longer than the 5-rounders, which is probably why we still have them around, but as I said, the 5-rounders basically aren't available. If you're looking to shoot this gun, you're probably going to be stuck with 3-rounders, and even then, they're like $5 a piece, so be expecting to pay a little bit for these. Now, in terms of reloading, let's talk about the bullet first off. Now, as I said, this is an antiquated case. This was basically an 11mm Gross round that's been necked down to 8mm. That's why this round looks so odd. And basically it was antiquated shortly after it was designed, but it lasted all the way through World War II and beyond in use because it's a decent round. I mean, it's less powerful than the .308, but it's definitely a modern large rifle round. And you can really feel it in one of these light rifles. Now, the good news about this round is that the components are readily available. The dies through Lee are very available. They're very cheap as well. The brass is available. The rounds are just the same rounds I use for my Mauser, 8mm Mauser. I use 175 grain. So all of that is good news. It's not hard to reload these. The bad news is something that I talked about before, is that the brass of this is moderately expensive, but they don't last. Let me see if I can show you just how much this expands. I'm not sure if that's going to come out in camera, but it's extremely noticeable. And each time these expand, your brass is going to get harder and harder and harder and more likely to crack. So you need to anneal these. You can look up online how to do that, but that'll extend the life of your brass by a lot. Now, for more bad news, reloading data on this round is basically not available. Now, Lee... Let me see if I can get this case open. Lee does provide some reloading data for you. However, this is very, very light loads. I'm talking like target loads. Now, I don't mind that. I use 3031 for this, and I use pretty much what they recommend because it's a very light target load. However, if you're looking to actually get a service load with this and actually use this gun at distance, basically you're going to have to talk to other reloaders and trust them. Trust the old guys, because it's just not available for this gun. An actual full power load, you're not going to find that in any reloading data book that I know of. It's basically not available. People do not trust the reloader not to blow these guns up, and you do kind of have to know a little bit about these guns to know which round went with which gun from which era, because they were produced over such a long period of time. So really what I recommend with these guns, if you own one, is to shoot low-powered target loads. If you're really interested in shooting a full power load, then you're going to have to do a lot of research. However, for me, I really just enjoy shooting target loads out of these guns, and so that's good enough for me. So a couple of just little things about this gun. As I said, this is an end block clip, slips in here. Now, if you need to get this out, there's simply a button right here that will eject it out the top with a little bit of force, actually. So if you just need to remove the cartridges in there, not a big deal. That'll shoot them out. Not a whole lot else going on in this gun. It's fairly easy to disassemble, not a whole lot going on with it. A lot of these I found that are in very good condition for not a lot of money. I mean, if you want one of these, you can usually get one for under $500. It's not really a big deal to find one of these. So if you're interested in them, I'll look around, and if you find good deals, especially on the full rifle version or maybe a LaBelle, let me know.